The hammer weighed exactly 4 pounds, not 3, not 5, 4. And it fell 1,500 times onto a single square of gold, each strike calculated, each impact measured not by force, but by feel. The workshop was dark, always dark, because daylight made the metal too fragile to touch. One beam of sunlight through a crack in the shutters could ruin an hour's work. The gold would tear like tissue, disintegrate under the slightest pressure, become too brittle to handle. So the beaters worked in near blackness, in rooms with sealed windows and oil lamps burning low, where the only sound was the rhythmic percussion of hammers meeting anvils. 1,600 strokes, sometimes 1,800, until a piece of gold the size of a postage stamp became thin enough to see through. 0.0001 millimeters. Thinner than a human hair. Thinner than breath. This is what gold beating was. This is what London once knew how to do better than anywhere else in the world. And this is what no longer exists in Britain. The last workshop closed in 2017. Not with ceremony, not with headlines. Just a quiet announcement that after 230 years, the business could no longer sustain itself. The hammers were sold. The anvils were archived. The techniques, developed over generations, refined through centuries, were declared extinct by Heritage Crafts in 2019. Extinct, not endangered, not at risk, gone. Gold beating existed in London since at least the 1600s. By the 1800s, the city had hundreds of beaters, entire streets in Clerkenwell and Holborn where the sound of hammering filled the air from dawn until dusk. They supplied gilders across Britain, church restoration, picture frames, furniture decoration, bookbinding, architectural details on stately homes. Anywhere gold leaf was needed, London beaters provided it. The process began with pure gold, 24 karat, melted and cast into small ingots. These ingots were rolled into ribbons, cut into squares roughly an inch across, and stacked between sheets of specially prepared vellum called gold beater skin. The skin came from the intestinal lining of cattle, stretched, cleaned, treated with a solution that made it both strong and pliable. It had to withstand the hammering without tearing. It had to release the gold without sticking. It had to be replaced constantly because the friction wore it down. A beater might go through 50 sheets of skin in a single day. The work required darkness because gold, when beaten thin enough, becomes light-sensitive. Exposure to direct sunlight changes its molecular structure. It becomes brittle, unworkable, useless. So workshops were built without windows or with shutters that stayed closed year-round, and the beaters worked by the dimmest light possible, just enough to see the outline of the gold, nothing more. The temperature had to be controlled. Too cold and the gold would crack. Too warm and it would stick to the vellum. Humidity mattered, air pressure mattered, everything mattered. The hammer itself was a tool refined over centuries. 4 pounds, flat striking face, perfectly smooth. Handle length calculated to allow controlled force without excessive swing. The beater held it loosely, not gripped but balanced, and let gravity do most of the work. Rhythm mattered more than strength. 1,500 strikes per sheet, each one identical, each one landing in exactly the right place. Too hard and the gold would tear, too soft and it wouldn't spread. The beater learned to feel the resistance through the handle, a subtle feedback that told them when to adjust, when to rotate the packet, when to stop. It took years to develop that sensitivity. A decade, sometimes more. And during those years, apprentices ruined thousands of sheets learning the difference between enough and too much. A finished sheet of gold leaf measured roughly 3 inches square and weighed almost nothing. You couldn't pick it up with your fingers. The oils on your skin would damage it. You couldn't breathe near it. The slightest exhale would send it floating across the room. Gilders, the craftspeople who applied gold leaf to surfaces, used specialized tools, soft brushes made from squirrel hair, knives with agate blades that wouldn't conduct static electricity, cushions covered in suede that wouldn't create friction. They worked in controlled environments, handling sheets so thin you could read a newspaper through them. And every one of those sheets had been hammered by hand, 1,500 times, in the dark, by someone who had spent a lifetime learning how hard to hit gold. The decline didn't happen suddenly. It was incremental, Mechanical rolling mills appeared in the late 1800s, machines that could flatten gold between steel rollers, producing leaf in a fraction of the time. The quality wasn't quite the same. Machine-rolled leaf was uniform, predictable, but it lacked the subtle variations that hand-beaten gold possessed, microscopic irregularities that made it cling to surfaces differently, reflect light in more complex ways. Gilders could tell the difference. Restorers working on medieval churches could tell. But for most purposes, modern picture framing, commercial gilding, decorative applications, machine-made leaf was adequate. And it was cheaper, much cheaper. By the early 1900s, imports from Italy, India, and China had begun flooding the British market. Gold leaf produced overseas, where labor costs were lower, sold for half the price of London-made sheets. British workshops tried to compete by specializing, focusing on the highest quality work, the restoration projects, the clients who valued traditional methods. For a while it worked, but the market kept shrinking. By the 1960s, only a handful of beaters remained in London. By the 1990s, fewer than 5. By 2010, 1. And in 2017, none. The physical toll was part of the problem. Gold beating destroyed hands. The repetitive motion, 1,500 identical strikes day after day, year after year, caused chronic injuries that no amount of rest could fully heal. Carpal tunnel syndrome, tennis elbow, arthritis in the wrists and shoulders. Beaters worked through pain because stopping meant losing the rhythm. And losing the rhythm meant losing the feel. And losing the feel meant the work became impossible. But there was a limit. Most beaters couldn't continue past 60. Some had to stop earlier, and when they stopped, there was no one to replace them. The apprenticeship system had collapsed. Who would spend a decade learning a skill that paid less than factory work, damaged your body, and might not exist by the time you mastered it? Heritage Crafts, the organization that tracks endangered traditional skills in the UK, placed gold beating on their red list in 2017. Critically endangered, they called it. 2 years later, they reclassified it. Extinct. The last practitioner had retired. No one was teaching it. No one was learning it. The workshops were gone. The tools were in museums. The knowledge existed only in books and archival photographs. Images of men in dark rooms, hammers raised, gold invisible beneath their hands. There are still gold beaters in the world. Italy has a few. India has more. But the British tradition, the specific techniques developed in London over 3 centuries, is gone. Not because the craft itself became obsolete. Gold leaf is still used. Restoration work still requires it. But the economic reality shifted. The training took too long. The physical demands were too severe. The market was too small to support even one British workshop. And so it ended. Not with a final masterpiece, not with recognition or ceremony, just a closure notice and an empty building. Do you remember the last time you saw gold leaf being applied? On a church ceiling, perhaps. A museum frame. An architectural detail that caught the light. Did you wonder where it came from? Did you think about the hands that made it? The hammers that once filled London streets with rhythmic percussion are silent now. The dark workshops where beaters spent decades perfecting their craft have been converted to flats, offices, storage spaces. The gold beater's skin, that specialized vellum that could withstand 1,500 strikes, is no longer produced in Britain. The knowledge of how to judge gold by feel, how to control a 4-pound hammer through 1,800 identical motions, how to work in darkness because light would destroy what you're creating. All of it exists now only in historical records. You can read about it. You can see photographs, but you cannot watch it being done. Not here, not anymore. Skill used to survive in hands. But when the hands stop working and no new hands learn the motion, the skill doesn't just fade. It disappears completely. And with gold beating, that's exactly what happened. Under this video, there's a subscribe button. It's a small action, but it helps document trades that were once alive, even if they no longer are. If craftsmanship still matters to you, if knowledge carried in hands feels worth remembering, subscribing simply means you want these stories recorded before they're completely forgotten. And before you leave, tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever seen gold leaf being made? Do you know of crafts that have disappeared in your lifetime? Did you work in a traditional trade that no longer exists? Share your experience below. That's how this knowledge stays visible, even after the craft itself has gone.